White Castle is an American regional hamburger restaurant chain in the Midwestern and Mid-Atlantic United States. Generally credited as the country's first fast food chain, it is known for its small, square hamburgers, sometimes referred to as sliders. The burgers were priced at 5 cents until the 1940s and remained at 10 cents for years thereafter. For several years, when the original burgers sold for 5 cents, White Castle periodically ran promotional ads in local newspapers which contained coupons offering 5 burgers for 10 cents, takeout only. On January 14, 2014, Time labeled the White Castle slider the most influential burger of all time. History. Walt A. Anderson, 1880 to 1963, had been running food stands in Wichita since 1916 when he opened his first diner in a converted streetcar. After a second and third location, he was looking to open a fourth location when he met Billy Ingram, and together they started the White Castle chain. White Castle was founded in 1921 in Wichita, Kansas. Cook Walt A. Anderson partnered with insurance and real estate man Edgar Waldo Billy A. Ingram to make White Castle into a chain of restaurants and market the brand and its distinctive product. The original location was the northwest corner of 1st and Main. The building is no longer standing. At the time, Americans were hesitant to eat ground beef after Upton Sinclair's 1906 novel The Jungle had publicized the poor sanitation practices of the meatpacking industry. The founders set out to change the public's perception of the cleanliness of the industry they were creating, to invoke a feeling of cleanliness. Their restaurants were small buildings with stainless steel interiors, and employees outfitted with spotless uniforms. Their first restaurants in Wichita, Kansas, were a success, and the company branched out into other Midwestern markets, starting in 1922 with El Dorado, Kansas. The earliest buildings, such as Indianapolis White Castle No. 3, built in 1927, had exteriors of white enamel-glazed brick and interiors of enameled steel. The Indianapolis unit was in operation until 1979, making it, at the time of its closure, the longest operating fast food restaurant in the country. The company constructed this style of building from 1924 to 1929. White Castle Building No. 8, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, originally built in 1936 and remodeled. Photo and info box above is an example of the chain's buildings with prefabricated white porcelain enamel on steel exteriors. The building measured 28 feet, 8.5 meters, by 28 feet, 8.5 meters, and was made to resemble the Chicago Water Tower, with octagonal buttresses, crenellated towers, and a parapet wall. The success of White Castle led to numerous imitators. Restaurants copied the distinctive architecture of White Castle buildings, as well as created confusion for consumers by using a similar name. The first of these imitators in Wichita was Little Castle. Many competitors created their names with a play on the White Castle name. Some restaurant chains just replaced the word castle with their own word. Cabin, cap, clock, crescent, diamond, dome, fortress, grill, house, hut, kitchen, night, log, manor, mill, palace, plaza, shop, spot, tavern, tower, turret, wonder, while others chose to replace white with another. Blue, kings, little, magic, modern, princes, red, royal, silver. Some of the other imitators included Castle Blanca, Blue Beacon, Blue Bell, Blue Tower, Red Barn, Red Lantern, and Clover Castle. Despite all the competition, None of the competitors were able to match the success of White Castle. Anderson is credited with invention of the hamburger bun as well as the Kitchener's assembly line, and the cook as infinitely replaceable technician, hence giving rise to the modern fast food phenomenon. Due to White Castle's innovation of having chain-wide standardized methods, customers could be sure that they would receive the same product and service in every White Castle restaurant, as Henry Ford did for car manufacturing. Anderson and Ingram did for the making of burgers. Anderson developed an efficient method for cooking hamburgers, using freshly ground beef and fresh onions. The ground beef was formed into balls by machine, 18 to a pound, or 40 per kilograms. The balls were placed upon a hot grill and topped with a handful of fresh, thinly shredded onion. Then they were flipped so that the onion was under the ball. The ball was then squashed down, turning the ball into a very thin patty. The bottom of the bun was then placed atop the cooking patty with the other half of the bun on top of that so that the juices and steam from the beef and the onion would permeate the bun. After grilling, a slice of dill pickle was inserted before serving. Management decreed that any condiments, such as ketchup or mustard, were to be added by the customer. Anderson's method is not in use by the chain today, having changed when the company switched from using fresh beef and fresh onion to small, frozen square patties, originally supplied by Swift and Company, which are cooked atop a bed of rehydrated onions laid out on a grill. The heat and steam rise up from the grill through the onions. In 1951, 5 holes in the patty were added to facilitate quick and thorough cooking. The very thin patties are not flipped throughout this process, since fast food was unknown in the United States at White Castle's founding. There was no infrastructure to support the business, as is common with today's fast food restaurants. The company established centralized bakeries, meat supply plants, and warehouses to supply itself. It was said that the only things they didn't do themselves were raise the cows and grow their own wheat. Ingram developed a machine to create previously unheard of paper hats. In 1932, Ingram set up a subsidiary, Paper Linen, to make these hats and other paper products used in his restaurants as well as for many other purposes. At the time, White Castle's distribution stretched from Wichita to New York. Ingram decided the central office should be in the center of the distribution area. To accommodate this, in 1936, the central office was moved to Columbus, Ohio. In the same year, Ingram decided to close all of the restaurants in the 2 smallest profit markets, Wichita and Omaha. In 1955, Paper Linen produced over 42 million paper hats worldwide with more than 25,000 different inscriptions. White Castle also created a subsidiary in 1934 named Porcelain Steel Buildings that manufactured movable, prefabricated, steel frame structures with porcelain enamel interior and exterior panels that could be assembled at any of its restaurant sites. This is the first known use of this material in a building design. The company also began publishing its own internal employee magazine, the White Castle Official House Organ, circa November 1925. It was originally named the Hot Hamburger. The bulk of the material was contributed by company personnel and consisted mostly of letters and photographs of workers, promotional announcements, 25-year milestones, retirements, and similar items of interest arranged by geographic area. Employees could read about the progress and innovations made by those in other areas which made everyone aware of the entire system's direction and condition. The White Castle Official House Organ was published quarterly at least through the early 1980s, and at some point was renamed the Slider Times. The Ohio Historical Society houses an extensive archive of White Castle System, Inc. records from 1921 to 1991, including issues dating from 1927 to 1970 of the White Castle official house organ. Ingram's business savvy not only was responsible for White Castle's success but for the popularization of the hamburger. In 1933, Ingram bought out Anderson, and the following year the company moved its corporate headquarters to Columbus, Ohio. Co-founder Billy Ingram was followed as head of the firm by his son E. W. Ingram, Jr., and grandson E. W. Ingram, III. In 1959, White Castle expanded into new markets for the first time since the 1920s. Billy Ingram, who had retired to Miami in 1958, built 3 White Castle restaurants there. The company closed the Florida operations in 1967 due to inefficient supply distribution. Throughout its existence, White Castle has been a private company and relied on company-owned stores. It remains privately held today, and its restaurants, all in the U.S., are all company-owned. None are franchised. In concurrence with its 80th anniversary in 2001, White Castle started its Cravers Hall of Fame. Cravers are inducted annually based on stories written about them by another person that the particular craver submits for consideration. Between 5 and 10 stories have been chosen each year, with a grand total of 64 stories selected through the 2007 induction class. This represents less than 1% of the total stories submitted since the inception of the Cravers Hall of Fame, an indication of the exclusivity of the honor. Starting in 2011, the Long Island White Castle has become a frequent setting for challenges on the show Impractical Jokers, during which the contestants will pose as cashiers, drive-through workers, and janitors. The Ingram family's steadfast refusal to franchise or take on debt throughout the company's existence has kept the chain relatively small, with a more discontinuous geography than its principal competitors. There are over 420 White Castle outlets, all in the United States and predominantly in the Midwest, Kentucky, and Tennessee. The exception is a significant smattering of outlets in the New York metropolitan region and 2 locations in Nevada. By comparison, there are over 36,000 McDonald's locations globally, with approximately 14,000 of those in the United States. The chain does, however, sell frozen sliders at supermarkets nationwide, with availability varying by chain. Some locations are also co-branded with Church's Chicken. Current White Castle markets include Chicago, Cincinnati, Columbus, Ohio, Dayton, Detroit, Indianapolis, Las Vegas, Louisville, Minneapolis-St. Paul, Nashville, New York City, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and St. Louis. Louisville and Columbus also house bulk manufacturing, grocery store sales, meat and bun production divisions, company HQ and the porcelain steel buildings, PSB, division are in central Columbus, Ohio. White Castle exited the Cleveland and Akron markets in Ohio effective December 25, 2014. The first White Castle in the far western United States opened at the Casino Royale Hotel and Casino on the Las Vegas Strip on January 27, 2015. This was the first expansion for White Castle into a different state in 56 years. On the first day of business, demand for food was so great that the restaurant had to temporarily close for 2 hours to restock. White Castle Vice President Jamie Richardson said that the store sold 4,000 sliders per hour in its first 12 hours. He was not aware of any similar closing because of demand in White Castle's 94-year history. In September 2015, White Castle began to offer veggie sliders with veganized buns, making the sliders entirely vegan. In December 2015, White Castle announced that Chief Executive Officer, CEO, E.W. Bill Ingram III would be stepping down at the end of the year, but continue to be chairman of the board. His daughter, Lisa Ingram, then became the fourth CEO of the company. A second White Castle location opened in Las Vegas on September 22, 2017 on Fremont Street. Marketing. White Castle also markets its sandwiches in 30 hamburger boxes, called a crave case. The figure of 30 burgers represents the number that can be produced on one of its standard grills. At the same time, a crave crate is also offered, with the contents being 100 burgers. In 2003, White Castle unveiled a new logo but has been promoting the slogan, "What You Crave," since 1994. The breakfast menu is available until 11:00 a.m. Some stores have attempted to boost overnight sales and start breakfast service as early as midnight. The regular menu is available 24 hours a day. However, some restaurants have started closing at 1:00 a.m. on weeknights and only staying open all night on Friday and Saturday. Although White Castle originated in Wichita, Kansas, the city has not had a branch since 1938, nor is there a White Castle restaurant in the entire state of Kansas. White Castle is one of the few restaurant chains that does not have a location in its original city. White Castle is also unusual in that their store locations include a region that is essentially a significant exclave to its primary area. It has many stores in metropolitan New York City, though the next nearest location outside the metropolitan area is located hundreds of miles away. In the Midwest, countries formerly with White Castle: Malaysia 1989-90, Japan 1986, Singapore, Mexico. See also White Tower, White Castle Building No. 8, a historic White Castle located in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Little Tavern, Crystal. List of hamburger restaurants. Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle. Company website. Fan page on company website.